Big week ahead, folks, as the Fed is gearing up to announce its next rate cut decision, as the markets are already on edge. And at the same time, the altcoin season index has appeared to have flipped into the high side, now officially calling for an altcoin season. So what does this mean for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, and for the broader crypto market as we head into this pivotal week? I'll break it all down right here for you today. My name is Paul Sampson. Welcome back to DataDash. When it comes to trading and investing, the number one advantage that you can have is access. Access to reliable insights, professional grade analysis, and a community that pushes you to get better each and every single day. And that's exactly what we've built over at DataDash Pro. When you join, you get direct access to our Traders Club Discord, where I share daily updates, chart setups, and insights into both short-term moves and longer-term market structure. Whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or the broader altcoin market, you'll know the exact levels and setups I'm watching personally. And just as important, you'll be a part of a tight-knit community of traders who are learning, growing, and navigating this market together. On top of that, you can subscribe to the Dash Report written by Nicholas Merton, which is a monthly deep dive into the global macro picture, everything from equities and commodities to interest rates and crypto. Nick breaks it all down, the bigger trends driving financial markets as well, and it's one of the most valuable resources you can have if you want to understand the why behind the moves we're seeing. And if you really want the full DataDash experience, you can bundle the two, the Traders Club and the Dash Report, and get the complete package. That way you're covered from daily trading setups all the way to monthly macro strategy. So if you're serious about trading, investing, and staying ahead in this fast-moving market, I'd encourage you to check out datadashpro.com. Whether you join the Discord, subscribe to the Dash Report, or bundle the two of them together, you'll be taking a big step toward trading with more clarity and confidence. That's datadashpro.com, where traders and investors level up. The link is down in our description below. I look forward to seeing you all inside. All right, folks, so Bitcoin getting that nice, really nice launch off of that $107,000 region. Again, that we were looking for as we were coming down and making this move just a couple weeks ago as we basically started the month of September. Now, I do have a few key areas mapped out here a little bit more locally, and we're going to talk on the bigger picture here in a second. But now that we've gotten this move pretty much underway, I just wanted to highlight another reason why I was really looking for this area to see a move back to the upside, and especially towards this $118,000 area, if not new all-time high. But really, this 117, 118 has got my attention from this region, and this is the reason why. Now, if you recall, a few weeks back, some of the members in the Discord actually pointed out this bearish shark setup. This is a harmonic, so a sequence of Fibonacci's, very specific target areas, and then you could look for basically the next move at that point, right? So I highlighted that this was a bearish setup. We had three specific targets, one of which being this 1.13 fib retracement, which is basically down on 110,000. But ultimately, I had mentioned that even if we came down to this area, you couldn't just overly, just blindly assume we just get a move back up from this region. You have to look for a new trigger, essentially, when you come down to this region, a new setup, essentially, right? Something that would just gives you the idea or the base case and the probability side of seeing another move back to the upside. So while we were coming down and making our way into these regions here, again, I pointed out this $107,000 region. And on the 1st of September, so again, 15 days ago in the Discord area, I posted that we had actually now a bullish shark. that we went from the bearish shark setup and right into a bullish shark setup. So this is something that could bring us up to all-time highs, but ultimately it was looking for 117,000 to 118,000, and that was out of this $107,000 region. So again, going from this bearish setup, all the targets met. I'm looking for a new setup now that we're down at the lows. And this was essentially this setup here. So we had the bullish shark come into completion. That does give us a little bit of an extension zone for the completion zone to come into. On top of that, I paired it up with, again, some other key levels of confluence. And we were looking for that bounce out of here. So the major target, which we've come very close to, I mean, at this point, you'd almost have to say, give it a tag almost. But this 117 to 118,000, right? This is the region I'm looking for as a major target. Now, locally, we just kind of came up. We've put in a high. We just came up and swept the high on a little weekly basis. One of those setups I look for each and every week, where you take the low, or I'm sorry, you take the high and die, essentially. More than anything, we're probably just coming back down to our weekly pivot. and then we'll see if we make our jaunt up to these regions. We'll come back to this here in a bit, but this is a really big area to look for any kind of a sizable rejection. On top of that, if we flip it, we just got two new, major areas to look to, which is basically going to take us up to a new all-time high. But 118, 117, potentially even where we already hit our head at. This was a sizable $11,000 run. This is something to, this region is really something to be paying attention to here on Bitcoin. And if we flip it, I think we make a run for the all-time high. So I'll come back to Bitcoin in a little bit here, kind of just double down on the overall high side, the macro outlook here. Especially as we're coming to the end of September, which has been a major date for me. On top of that, the rate cuts are coming in this week, right? So it's got a lot of people up in limbo, really. I think that, coming from me, who's relatively a pretty decent contrarian, I try to go for where the majority are not in the sense of thought process, right? So I think that a lot of people are getting pretty bullish here, assuming that the rate cuts will, be had this week, which will obviously inject new liquidity into the market. At least that's the thought. And then we would see the markets continue higher, right? While there's the other side of people, I think, trying to be a little bit on the contrarian side and thinking that, oh, everybody's thinking that, so it's probably going to dump. It's a really tough one to come into with the news at the moment, right? So for me, I'm looking more around the technicals, and then I'll, sprinkling in the news. And especially when you have news events, I will always highlight this. When you have a news event that you can see coming a mile away, meaning this Fed rate decision, we know the exact date, we know the exact time, we have an idea of what it's even going to be. It's almost like a baked in or whatever the case is, or just one of those things that I don't know. I don't really tend to lean super heavily into it. I think that you could very well prepare yourself for a move beforehand and just wait for, what happens in the market there. But to me, I think we're going to get a little bit of both, to be honest. I do think we're actually going to pump a little bit more. All right. So that gets everybody pretty excited as we kind of go into the end of the month here, maybe even into October. And then from there, we'll have to see how things play out. And then ultimately, I think we get a sizable correction here in the next coming months. But until then, let's take a look at this. This is the Altcoin Season Index. This is a third-party website, essentially, that monitors this and, basically has it almost like an RSI, where you have these time frames and time periods where the market is in a position of Bitcoin season, where Bitcoin's outperforming the altcoins. Then you get these small bursts, it appears, where the altcoins outperform Bitcoin. And just like the RSI, you get oversold and overbought, and then the price action returns essentially to the median. Now, what I want to highlight about this is that just now, within the few last days, people are very much pointing this out like, oh, it's officially altcoin season. That is one thing that I always like to not be on the side of. If you've been following here, if you've been following me for even years before I got with Nick here at DataDash, one of the biggest things I tend to look for is the bigger moves before they happen. Of course, obviously that's what anybody probably wants to do. This is a time frame where Ethereum was trading at $1,400, Solana back at 97. This was before the 400% CRO pump just a few weeks ago. So we've already had a sizable move in many of the assets. Not everything, by no means, and I do think that there's still upside across the board. But to put it in the perspective of like just now it's altcoin season, I think that that's not necessarily the case. And realistically, I feel that this is more so one of the most lagging indicators that we probably have ever seen. So it's like, okay, obviously it might be a time where it's altcoin season now. You've already had many things, see significant rallies. Things can continue to rally from here, of course, especially if we get into a heated area here. But for me, I like to get involved down lower at these areas here. Much like taking it back to basically April time, where this was my altcoin season indicator, right? So ever since 2023, I was targeting for this bullish bat, basically to complete for ETH BTC. And essentially, this is a sequence of Fibonacci's, once again, that once completed has a very bullish reversal, right? So this is a very high time frame. This is on the weekly time frame. This is actually one of the very first things I ever talked about here on DataDash with Nick back in the beginning of this year, 2025, as we were coming into this completion zone. And this is what really indicated to me that we were going to see at least a rally out of Ethereum, which in turn usually leads to the altcoins, right? So we came down, we put in that low around April time. I was anticipating that low to come in around March, mind you, looking at that years out. So it was a couple weeks off, but ultimately still, had that bias around that time frame. So looking for that upside move. Obviously, it's been nothing but since, and we're actually coming into a really big target area of this. So for me, while I do anticipate more upside in the market in the next coming weeks, I think that pairing up with the fact that ETH is coming into a huge ETH BTC target area, the altcoin season is already at, basically the overbought territory. While I do think that we can see more upside for several weeks here, I just want to point out that this is, I don't know, just not necessarily something that, like, just because we're pushed up into this region means that everything's going to blast off from here, even though I think that other indicators do showcase that we will see some upside. And just looking back on a few other time frames here, this was essentially the last real altcoin rally that we saw was the end of the year last year, 2024. And you can see how quickly we got up to this region and then we just kind of came right back in. Now that was just like a straight up, push up, and then you came back down, cooled off. You go back to the one before that, this was January of 2024. Realistically, if you look back to when it began, was Q4 of 2023. Now this was an explosive area, if you remember it back then. And so this whole move up here was really, really great. And then we essentially peaked out around like April time of 2024. All right. So if we look at this, look it down at the bottom here, the ticker's down at January. So we were coming up in the high side and then we dropped back down, of course, for a few days, few weeks, whatever it was. And you push back up again into March. And this was really when the market peaked. This was when Bitcoin hit $74,000. This is when, ETH pushed back up to like 4K for the first time in a long time. Again, this was last, a year and a half ago at this point. ETFs just launched for Bitcoin in January, basically. So yeah, around that time, we had a few months where we were just kind of trading around this high side here. So could could we say the same thing could happen here? I think it could, right? It's not something that's totally out of the window there. I just think that this whole schematic is really pointless in my opinion, because you could either have one of these setups where you push up, you drop back down, and you spend weeks and months here, really, just like an RSI, or you have times where you push up and you immediately get rejected back down, like we saw at the beginning of this year. All right, so we had that last little rally in December of last year, November of last year, where XRP blasted like 500%, HBAR blasted like 700%. Pretty much the whole market, as far as altcoins, went up like 100 or 200% each across the board. And then you had a really quick, drawdown after that. Basically, everything gave it up about 70, 90%. So now we're back in this region again. So the question really is, are we going to just dump it right back down? Are we going to get a little couple weeks where we kind of float around this region? Personally, I think it's going to be something along this line. I just think that this chart is a nothing burger to me personally. I don't think there's a real easy way to put this anywhere. The only thing I could say off of this chart is that I'd utilize it in reverse, to where, again, when we're trading down here in Bitcoin season, it's probably not a time when you want to be offloading heavily all your altcoins, even if you're down, right? You want to look for probably accumulating options. And then now that we're in this region, granted, we only we don't know how long it's going to last or whatever the case is, but if we start to see some really big pop-offs, some really big fireworks, then while we're up here, this is where I'd probably look to take profits on some of the altcoins I've been holding, yada, 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 right? So that's how I would view this more than anything, is just kind of looking at this in a sense of timing of where we are. So we are now at the high side where, altcoins are definitely going to be in a position to move pretty decently. And if we get those really big moves, I just think that, personally, at least, I'll be finger on the sell button at times, right? So even if this lasts for weeks and months here, this is the area and the time when you want to be doing that. And then, of course, we have inflow right back down at some point, back down to the Bitcoin season. Bitcoin dominance with the straight up meltdown at this point, right? So really, we've made some local lower lows here, right? So this is all good things to see. We've got a pretty much just straight downtrend. So again, good for altcoins. I still anticipate this to continue on. We are officially back into this old range here. All right, so mind you, this is something that we've been working on since 2017. Huge range, weekly time frame here, folks. I'm not looking to state anything I'm about to point out here is going to take overnight action here. But what I do want to say is that we are in a position now where we've come up, we've hit really big key targets up in this region. We've dropped back down into this range now where we could easily see a little bounce back, a little lower high come in somewhere, right? We have a couple of key regions just here. We have the high side of the range, again, back at like 61%. And I'm just pointing that out for like an over time thing. So if we get a point where the altcoins do cool off, Bitcoin dominance gets another rally up for several weeks, maybe a few months down the road, ultimately coming back down into this target zone is what I'm anticipating over the next year and a half. Let's just say 2 years, whatever the case is. It's a really, really big move here on Bitcoin dominance that I think will bring us down into this region and the overall market, altcoins, ETH, everything, right? This is really in line with my overall 20-year market cycle that I think that Bitcoin is in the beginning or in the end stages of creating, where many are looking at the 4-year cycle theory, which is all we've seen so far. And I've covered this many, many times to where, I'm looking at the housing market cycle to where that is more than likely we're at the end game of that essentially for the next like coming years here. I'm really looking at like 2027 window, again 2026 to 2029, which is a huge gap, I understand, but those are the years that I've been waiting for basically since 2018 for us to come into this like overall just everything bubble end zone. So for Bitcoin dominance to pull back into those regions potentially around that 2027 2028 area, I think that it lines up really, really nicely with the overall market continuing up. So short term here, I think, again, we have several weeks where everything is more than likely going to see some moves. Then we're probably in for a correction here soon, folks. So even though I'm looking at this in a really big macro outlook here, don't be fooled that if we get something along this line where you get a push back up for several weeks, maybe even a few months, that's a really big, 7 or 8% move on Bitcoin dominance would crush the market for a few weeks at a time. Okay, just to put that in perspective, when we pushed back up on January, right? So January of this year, let's just see, we pushed up 8% from January to February, and we got this wick right here, but this was when we had a really big market drop for the altcoins this year. Okay, so those 8 and 10% moves in dominance are not fun. So again, it's just one of those things. If you're going to be short term moving your assets, just be willing and ready to be a little aggressive there. Or if you're just long term holding, just be aware that we are going to have just on the way up, right? If we're going to get this big move down, it's not going to be straight, right? It's going to be lots of bumps and turns around the way. Lots of news is going to happen. I mean, just think about how much has happened in the world just during this little move here from basically 2022 low to till now. So big things can happen around the world ultimately and still lead us down into this region. Okay, so that's how I'm looking at things. Again, on the macro side of things, I believe that we're still inbound for this final, the end of this little rally here. This is again the 20-year housing market cycle that I truly believe is a piece or what we're watching unfold now alongside with Bitcoin, is that when Bitcoin was created, I do think that it's been putting in its first 20-year cycle alongside the housing market. And again, just a really quick overview of that is that generally with the housing and economic and stock market, so it's pretty much everything, right? Like everything kind of runs in tandem. You generally have this overall 18 to 20 year cycle. These few year, stacked here are basically the beginning stage. This area here is the mid-cycle slowdown, generally started off by a black swan event, usually ends with high inflation, high interest rates, and everybody expects a recession or a continued downfall. But then it turns into just a face melting rally for several years before the actual top comes in. And this is just, the 4 last iterations here where we started in the 50s, ran it up here. Cuban Missile Crisis is our black swan. A couple years go by, we ran it up and we topped out officially in 72. We restarted it in 75. We run up to the Gulf War as our black swan event in the 80s. A couple years go by, high interest rates, high inflation, everybody expects a recession. You push it up till 89. Restarted in 93, okay? Run it up, 2001, 9/11 is our black swan event. A couple years go by, high inflation, high interest rates, everybody expects a continued recession. We pushed it up to 2007, most notable, right? So that was actually the last notable high here. And in theory, just 20 years later would put us at 2027 is just an easy math there. But it's generally 18 to 20 years, so that's a really big window, I understand. But yeah, we essentially restarted in 2011. Bitcoin's born in 2009. Really, 2011 is when you have the most data points behind it. But overall, I'm anticipating, or I'm envisioning that crypto is putting in its very first 20-year cycle, right? So we had the run up here, 2020, COVID, a couple years go by, high interest rates, high inflation, everybody expects a recession. And then now I'm fully imagining we're getting into that end goal here where 2026 to 2029 is really the big time I'm looking for, with an emphasis around 2027, 2028. But anyways, that's the overall big idea here, which leads me into still anticipating, even though we could have some short term, and by short term, I mean, it could be 6 and 8 months again of just sideways slow consolidation for Bitcoin, which has been the MO this entire bull run. Bitcoin went from $15,000 to $125,000 in the span of just a few years, but because of how it did it with the very slow and progressive growth, which is really what you want to see. And I say slow, I mean, a couple years is not very slow in that sense, but compared to what we've seen in the past, right, we usually get these like 20x years. It feels, because most people are coming in at the wrong time, which even looking at this overall potential 20-year cycle, anybody that's coming in the market today, for a long-term brand new investment, like somebody that's like, I'm going to come into the market, I'm looking to invest for 10 and 20 years from here, from 2025. To me, that wouldn't be where I'd be coming into the market. Obviously, I'm actually looking to scale out of this market from the last 10 years that I've been investing. And that goes for real estate, stock market, crypto market, everything in these next coming years, because if we're going to have another 2008 recessionary, big pullback, which truly I think is going to be even worse than that. I think it's going to be something along the lines of Great Depression 2.0. It's also the 100-year cyclical anniversary of the Great Depression in 2029. So the end of this decade has been a huge target zone for me, to where I don't know if I want to be holding certain assets. I do think that there's actually a world where Bitcoin actually survives that drawdown a little bit, but nothing else. So, and we'll get into that in a different video. And a lot of that is the comparison to basically gold after we got the ETF on gold. So at the end of the day, folks, weeks like this remind us why it's so important to stay prepared. Between Fed decisions and the rotation into altcoins, the markets can change on a dime, as we all know. Quick reminder before we wrap things up, if you would like a reliable place to trade both futures and spot, be sure to check out channel partner here at DataDash, which is Blowfin. The link is down in the description below. And if you'd like full access to my market updates, trade setups, our growing community, things like the shark that I posted just 2 weeks ago that's coming to fruition now before I release it publicly, head on over to datadashpro.com, join the Traders Club Discord. Thank you all as always for tuning in. My name is Paul Sampson. This is DataDash. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, cheers.